started. And Margaret, can you move to the next slide and I can explain how to participate today? So we've shown, thank you. We've shown this slide a couple of times, but just so you all know, if you're unfamiliar, there are 2 ways to participate in today's call. There'll actually be 3. We're going to do a little poll at the end. But the first 2 ways are the raise hand tool. So if you'd like to be unmuted at any time during the call, you can click the little raise hand button, and I can go ahead and unmute you, and you can contribute verbally, ask a question or make a comment or anything like that. Otherwise, you can use the comment box or the question box. I think it says questions for you all, and you can just write a question or make a comment using that box. We'll also be able to download all of the things that you put in that question box, and we can post that when we post the slides on the FitWig website. So anything that you do put there, we will be able to preserve.
So today, thanks everybody for coming. I hope you had a great, a little bit of a break over the holiday. But we have an ambitious agenda for today, so I hope you brought your A game. We're going to look at some early data. We, as you might remember, put a challenge out there for some of you to look into your data, see if you were able to complete school-level data on the schools in 1 or more districts. And we got some great examples from Mississippi and Colorado. So we are going to share those and ask those folks to weigh in on what they learned from doing it. Then we're going to dive in and look at how we might use data to explore the development of a uniform procedure, which, as you remember, is a big part of this law. So we're going to talk about 2 things, what to exclude entirely from LEA expenditures, and then how to start parsing school level versus LEA level funds. And we're just going to look through data, not give you any instructions yet, but just sort of say what would we learn and how might we go about doing this. And then we'll finish up with some information on the in-person meeting and some next steps. So that's what's on the agenda today. And as we said, we're going to try to start with a meme. Some of you might be where I am at the moment, which is that I just got back from vacation and I have so many emails to go through. So we don't have video on, but that's what I look like right now. I'm guessing some of you might be in the same boat, but we'll try to power through. So you might remember from the last meeting, and this is still an open challenge. We ask you to try to do this either on your own LEA or if you're an LEA, or on an LEA in your state if you're at the SEA. And that is to start to explore your early data. So go ahead and pick an LEA. You want to select a few schools inside there and see if you have the data needed to start to complete this table. And that'll give you a sense of what the task is going to be at hand. It'll also help surface a bunch of issues that you may have in your state. It might raise a lot of questions and help clarify the steps going forward to you. We invite you to post your results, any questions or any comments on our blog with this data. And if you do that, we can use it in some of our examples. It can help inform our conversations going forward and sort of sketch out some additional topics for the group. We learned quite a bit from those who took us up on this offer. And Katie, is there anything else you want to say to the group about how to do that?
Sure. So there is a blog post on the blog where you can ask questions or comment or anything like that, where you'll actually see this image. But there's also something on the blog called Data Uploader, and that's the way that you can submit your data. You can also just submit it via email if that's easier for you. Whatever works for you is totally fine.
So let's jump in and look at what was submitted by Mississippi and Colorado on a district in each of those places. So, Katie, do you want to kick us off? And we're hoping at this point that the folks from these states who helped submit this data can tell us a little bit about what they found and any issues and concerns that they had.
Great. Yeah, so as Marguerite mentioned, we had 2 submissions. The Gulfport School District in Mississippi submitted their analysis of their data at the district level, and the Colorado SEA did an analysis of 1 district in Colorado and submitted that. So this is not the full analysis. This is just an excerpt from each data set that they submitted, but it was really informative for us to see, and it was also, sounds like it was really informative for them to go through that particular process. So I'm going to unmute each of them and go through this individually. So Dana, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you first. So Dana, now you are able to participate if you so want to explain your process. But we would just love to hear kind of what you learned going through this. And then I also have at the bottom there some of the notes that you shared as well that stuck out to you, things that you said you needed to think about doing differently in the future as you move forward. So if you want to do any explanation of your analysis, that would be great.
Okay. I went through the data in detail, and one of the things I found is that we're coding some salaries for certain departments to the LEA when they are, in fact, probably assigned to a school. So that's something that we would need to look at in the future as we continue to code those people and make sure that we're coding everybody to a school to get a truer picture of those expenditures by school. Vocational expenditures were coded to a separate cost center when they in fact served students from the middle school and the high school, so we had to kind of consolidate those expenditures. And capital expenditures, I just assumed that meant construction, so I omitted those and left in equipment and things of that nature. And then another couple of things that I noticed is that we have alternative schools and dropout prevention programs that we were not necessarily able to assign to a certain school, even though we're serving students from each of those schools. And that's just some of the things that came out when I was doing the analysis.
Excellent. That's interesting, and I think that may be the case elsewhere, where there are students served, but the students aren't assigned necessarily to a specific school. I'm adding that to our list of questions. At the same time, I will encourage you all to approach the Department of Ed directly with any kinds of questions like these, and we'll get some information out to you all about how to do that. But there are a lot of these tricky considerations. So question I think you might be asking is, if students are in a dropout prevention program or something like that, or maybe assigned to an alternative school doesn't have a school number, should those funds just go into the LEA level monies and be divided across all the schools, even though the students aren't assigned to these other schools, and how does that work? Or do we make up a new school? So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's kind of what I was thinking.
Right. Well, we in fact would still report that ADA for those students at that school. So
okay.
It's, but not the expenditures.
I see. So, and I wonder, if that is a central service to serve students who've been maybe expelled or something else from another school, maybe it just does belong in the LEA level expenditures. But yeah, I can imagine there's going to be a lot of this tricky stuff, and if one district might choose to do it differently than another district.
Right.
Right. Nice work.
Great. Thank you so much, Dana. And we'll now move on to Colorado. So I will unmute Adam and Yolanda and let you all participate here. So Adam, you are unmuted, and Yolanda, you are unmuted as well.
And I would
so if you all want to weigh in.
Yeah, others, remember you can raise your hand or type in comments in the question box.
Yeah.
Okay. This is Yolanda from the state of Colorado. In doing the analysis, we noted 3 items for the private sources. We're currently not yet able to identify and exclude gifts, grants, donations, so that's not part of our current analysis. Additionally, the impact aid is the only federal funds intended to replace local tax revenue that we were able to identify. We're not aware, we do not have a way to identify other sources. So curious if there's any other known sources out there.
That's a good point. I think on that one, the idea was the impact aid. That was the main one. However, during the stimulus plan, stimulus funds could have been considered state or local funds. And I know there are places where there's disaster relief or things like that, and sometimes federal funds can be done for that. But I don't think generally most districts will have anything else other than impact aid.
Okay. And then the last item was our food service. So that's not included in our current analysis. The reason being is one of the slides prior, I think it's stated not to include food service if the parent or student is paying.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So we just needed more clarification on that.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a messy area because from what I've seen in data, obviously the Department of Ed will do some supplemental funds for lunch, and then often parents pay into lunch. And so the regulation asks, and we'll show that again in a moment, that, in fact, I can go ahead and forward up to that, that it says in the including category, net expenditures to cover deficits for food services and student body activities. And so what they mean is just the state, local, or federal funding for those services. But in some districts, those may not be clearly separated once we're down to the school level. And I wonder if that may be what you were challenged with.
Yeah, that's the case for Colorado.
Yeah. So I think in one of those, I'm trying to, I don't know yet, but it may be the case that all food service expenditures could be deleted, and we can get into that in a moment. I can't remember if that's part of it. We'll look at that. But that may be an accounting challenge in lots of states. And then can you talk a little bit about the third column here? This is one where there was no LEA level expenditures.
Yeah, so the third column one there's, okay, so the one with the 1360
yeah, that was the
identified
charter.
as the header, so that one is a charter school. So the LEA level expenditures would only apply to the direct schools within that district, where the charter school has a separate accounting and submission process.
And so all is at the school.
Yes, correct.
Right. And it looks like we have a question about where are the federal grant funds accounted for, such as Title I, Title II, etc. Those would all be, and those of you from these districts, correct me if I'm wrong, in that federal row. Those are the funds that are out there per pupil, both at the school level and the LEA level. That's where the federal funds would go.
Correct, yes.
Great. Lois, let me know if that doesn't answer your question.
Okay.
Anyone, any other questions or comments? Thank you for doing this. You can see that you can start to pull out the numbers, and it does tease out some of the issues that we have. But we can jump ahead to our next part, which is about a little bit more about this uniform procedure. And I think looking at examples like this explains why we might need a uniform procedure. Because if one district has a hard time with food services or trying to decide what to do about vocational, then other ones will have the same issues, and that's where the uniform procedure will come into play that the SEA produces. In the end, the data that get produced by this are only useful if they can be compared. So if each school in each district is accounting for its expenditures in a different way, then the numbers don't really mean anything. So that's where the uniform procedure comes into play and why different states will need different uniform procedures. So let's take a look again at what the Department of Ed regulation is on the uniform procedures. It says that a state must develop a single statewide procedure, so there must be sort of one way of doing this, to calculate the LEA current expenditures per pupil, and another single statewide procedure to calculate the school level current expenditures per pupil. And so what we took that to mean is that the first one is to describe, what's in and out of the LEA. So are we going to exclude private money? Probably. So we need to figure out how to instruct everybody to exclude private money. Are capital expenditures going to be excluded? Probably, but many states will need some definition of what does that mean. In Florida, I know that technology expenditures, even including software, can be considered capital, so they may need to parse their definition of capital is part of that definition. What else would go in and what would go out? What about pensions? What about, we know adult education would be out, things like that. And then the second part of that, the school level, is what's at the school level versus at the LEA level. So how do you distinguish between the school level and the LEA level? What money goes into which of those two buckets? And that one's a little bit trickier, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But to just finish out the regulation, which I know we're going over this again, but each time we look at data, we want to go back and look at this regulation. We need to be including, but not limited to, expenditures for administration, instruction, instructional support, student support services. We can't go ahead and exclude transportation, can't exclude operation and maintenance of the plant, any other fixed charges. Preschool, because remember the preschool numbers count here, and there's some other guidance around that says preschool expenditures for anybody receiving free services, and the net expenditures to cover deficits for food services or student body activities. So they don't want the money that kids are paying for their lunch, but they do want the money the district is spending net of that. But it does say don't include expenditures for community services, capital outlay, and debt service. So really looking for an annual expense for the schooling for services for students. And then we need these statewide procedures. Once each state and district starts looking at its data, that's when they'll know we need some clarification in our uniform procedure on A, B, and C. So that brings us to the second part of our agenda, which is where do we start in developing a uniform statewide procedure? So the first part of that, remember, is what to exclude entirely from the LEA, like what's out. Just junior ROTC out? Do you want to keep that in? I think we raise that because sometimes people think it's a different program. Some people think it's related. Are there certain functions or object codes, pensions, for instance, that make sense to exclude? And if so, why? And how do we do that uniformly? Some states, like Illinois, the state pays the pension bill, so that won't be in the districts, with the exception of Chicago. So if Chicago included it, it would look like Chicago was spending more money than its peers, when in fact the state's paying that object code for the rest of the district. So how do you create in your uniform procedure something that treats all LEAs the same? And then are there any changes that are needed to ensure that the uniform LEA accounting of any exclusions? So does that mean that we need to start accounting for the fees paid for free lunch, for the lunches differently? I know that in Colorado there was some confusion around the private money. How do we need some changes to our chart of accounts or any other accounting procedures to make sure we can separate out private money? Will there need to be new training for district CFOs or any other new processes for financial data collection from LEA so that this uniform procedure works? And so that's sort of the challenge ahead, I would say. We listed out some just quick smart steps, but first go with what's already in place. You could choose, do the best you can to choose categories that are defined already on your existing statewide chart of accounts, or the F33 federal survey. So all the states do submit that F33 survey, and if you try to use categories that are on there, you'd probably be closer to getting uniformity across all of your LEAs. And that's just a good way to start thinking about defining what's in and what's out from your LEA expenditures. And then get input. So I think that the districts that are on the call will say that pilot that LEA reporting with us and see if those exclusions are going to work. So if we're looking at a category that we can't account for the money that way, we'll let you know. So that's what we would say are some smart steps to start. We as a group will work on some of these, and the uniform procedure will be different in every state. But we thought those were some smart steps that probably apply to everybody. But I think the more nitty-gritty stuff here will be on what happens when we're trying to parse LEA level versus school level expenditures. That second part of the uniform procedure. This one might be a little trickier, in part because all the LEA and school level money is from one pool, and that means it's one tends to be from one bank account, and we're asking people to put it into separate buckets and to do so in a uniform way. Currently, we do know that districts are making different choices about what to sort of assign centrally, and we brought some data from that. We dug in a little bit more on the Mississippi data, and we'll just show that again, but also some other data sources from other places that we have. So if they are making different choices about what to centralize, do we just have to, is it an accounting game, or do we need to tell them to stop doing that, or whatever? Are there functions, objects, programs that are reliably central across all LEAs, and then those can be at least excluded from the school level and put in the LEA level? What about weighted student formula districts? What about charters? Should have written there, what about very small districts with only one school? Which raises this question: how do we ensure the school level per pupil expenditure can actually be compared across schools in different districts, which is really part of one of the big goals here for this. So let's take a look at some data, since that seems to be the best place to start. So let's go back to the Mississippi data again, if we can. If we look at two different districts, and this is from the file, the larger file. I think, Katie, do you want to give some context on how we got these numbers?
Yeah, so this is the total expenditure file that Mississippi shared with us, and this is just a pretty quick analysis that I ran, breaking down based on the way that they code their expenditures, what's coded at the central level and what's coded down to the school level in various districts in Mississippi.
And so if we look, so these are averages for the district, even though it says school and LEA, but it's the average of what's coded to schools and the average of what's coded to the LEA for all the schools in each of these districts. So each column is a district. And it would look like, on average, in Columbus, 7,800 was coded to the school level, 2,400 is coded to the LEA level, for a total of 10,000. And in Jackson, we would also see 7,800 coded to the school level. So it would look like the schools in Columbus are spending about what the schools in Jackson are. So they look like they have roughly the same average school level per pupil expenditure. But that isn't what the full story, as we know, because the LEA expenditures are spending really pretty different numbers, whereas in Columbus they're spending more than almost 2.5 times as much as Jackson in central services. So and that's another piece of this, and that sort of raises a question, I guess, for all of these numbers, is how much of the money is actually apportioned to the school, and how much in this particular state, where there is a uniform chart of accounts, where there's a lot of consistency in the size, sort of the scope of the districts, how much is coded to central. And that number does vary. So as low as 12% in Jackson, as high as 29% of the money is coded to the central office, or at least not not coded to a school, I guess was what I'm saying, in Canton. And so that raises these questions then for us of what do the two school level numbers mean if they're backed up by pretty big different numbers at the LEA, and then do we want to make sure to, do we want to say that everybody has to code the same things to the LEA? Should Columbus be sending more of that money to the school in order to be clear about it, or are they just doing the same functions at the LEA and doing so in a way that's more expensive? Any thoughts? I'm going to pause here because there's a lot of data on the screen and see if anybody wants to chime in or comment. Anything else? All right, you can always raise your hand, as you know, or type something in the question box as well. Either one sort of works for us. And what I'll point out here again is, let's see if I did this right here, which is that the totals for these two are different. So depending on what we put in that LEA box, the numbers at the top could look even or they could look different. And so that'll be one of the considerations that you will want to do when you do your uniform procedure, is to figure out what is at the school level, what is at the LEA level. Do you want to just put everything at the school level? You can just add in this LEA level money. Do you want these numbers to look the same or different, or how do you want them to turn out? And part of that will come from looking at your data. Any other comments on this from the folks in Mississippi, since we pulled some of these numbers from your file? Or Katie, since I know you ran some of these analyses.
I don't have any. Let's see, Sam has a question. In some districts, itinerant special ed staff end up coded to LEA rather than school location. Was this a major factor here? Good question. I would say yes, not a major factor, but there are definitely parts in the data where some special ed staff or any other sort of teachers who are coded to the central level end up in that LEA line as opposed to, being coded to the school level. So again, I think it varies district by district, and we've heard from every state who does have a uniform chart of accounts that there is some problems with consistency across the state with getting everyone to code things in the exact same way to the school versus to the LEA level. So I think in some areas, like you would see those teachers coded to the LEA, and in some districts you might see them coded to the school, and that's just going to vary by district, and in some cases even by school.
And so I'll put that question back out to you all. Given that, what does that raise for your uniform procedure? Like, how would you handle that? And Sam, you can sort of unmute yourself if you like. What do you do about that? Do we leave it like this so that the two look like they're spending the same amount, but one might have all the itinerant special ed staff at the central? What do you think?
So Kim, I did go ahead and unmute you, so if you want to go ahead and ask your question or comment, that'd be great.
I would just wanted to add that we would probably have the same thing in Wyoming, and we would allow those expenditures coded at the school level to be classified as probably a school level expenditures, and then if there are certain SPED staff that are coded at the LEA level, they would then be allocated across the district evenly.
Great. So then in that case, so you just feel sort of comfortable with allowing different districts to do it differently. You could do two things. You could just sort of report the school level numbers. You could sum those totals and put them on each school's web page or each school's report card to show that they do actually have differences there in that their LEA share.
Right.
Yeah.
Because see, our districts they code everything to a target ID, which is our school ID, and if they don't put it at a school level, then they put it to the district level. So does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think this is a big area. I'm not sure we'll ever get pure consistency in coding. You know, some will always code things central. That's where the people work who are doing the same services, and maybe this is part of it. Just why instead of only reporting the number in yellow, it would make sense for each individual page to also report the number in the middle number and the green number.
Right. And I mean, we've talked about it that we would just strictly make notes or comment on every report that this could be an instance where this is occurring, or these certain types of coding.
And I think that if we got to the point where different schools in the districts had the full information, they could make sense of that, right? They could see the fact here that in one LEA, there, I both of us get 7,800, but in one LEA, there's a larger share there. So if I just want to look at the school level numbers, I can look at the school level numbers. If I want to look at the full number in the green, I can see sort of the full picture.
Right.
Great. And Donna, I went ahead and unmuted you so you can respond specifically to the Mississippi example here.
Well, I think it's exactly what's being discussed. It's simply the fact that, to this point, districts make those decisions internally, especially if they're sharing staff for services at multiple locations. Then probably just for convenience of coding, they have kept those at the LEA level. More and more, we're seeing that the districts are prorating those services out at the school level for tracking purposes. It just has not been a statewide approach. In other words, the department has not pushed that out at the district to say you should, you must do that. It's just been, whatever they felt like was the most accurate. And then we do have some size issues where we actually have some districts in the state who may only have one school. And so I'm not sure that there's even an understanding that everything in that district could be coded at a school level outside of true central services, such as administration or transportation. So I think for Mississippi, we just need to have more conversations with the SFOs to become more consistent with this coding process.
Yeah, I think that's definitely makes sense. And how many districts total are in Mississippi?
For the 16-17 school year, we have 144 school districts and 3 charters. And right now, the charters are handled very differently from the public schools.
That makes sense. And it looks like Pauline from Rhode Island has suggested that Rhode Island addresses that with location function codes and has an accounting manual that dictates what is a central expense versus a school expense. And I think Rhode Island, is one of the most, I would say, advanced and maybe well implemented chart of accounts. So I would love to do the same kind of analysis across Rhode Island to see if we're getting maybe a more consistent percentage at the bottom there then, or if we still, even with the consistent coding, see some variation in that percent that ends up being central. So that might be, I would love to look at that. It just seemed like it would be an answer for the group on whether or not going a little further with the chart of accounts gets us a better consistency. And we have a couple other comments.
Just a comment from Ken with Wyoming, just they're planning to do the same thing as far as educating the districts to make the determination of where to code and et cetera. And I think that leads to the previous slides where we were talking about the training. What are those steps they're going to have to follow on?
Right. And we'll look at, Katie pulled out some of the different kinds of things that tended to be in the Mississippi data categorized to the central. And you can see, not surprisingly, some health and life insurance, although there are sometimes districts where they put health and life insurance on the staff load, which is at the school. So there were testing, janitorial, legal, not surprising there in the first time. But overtime pay is something that that might be handled differently in different districts, especially if something's overtime pay one place, but it's a stipend somewhere else, but it's really for the same thing. Maybe there are other things on the right column, things like postage. Again, different districts might do postage differently. Professional development, food services were central in general. Superintendent salary and technologist was another item that was often central. And we will probably over time see differences in those, especially when you think about the charters, because the charters might actually outsource some of these functions, and then schools pay a particular usage fee, maybe even for how much nursing they use, or technology support, or things like that. So these numbers might, these kinds of categories might actually be pretty different in different places.
So Cynthia with Rhode Island had a question. I'll go ahead and unmute you, and hopefully we...
Hi, I just wanted to say, in terms of looking across the schools, we're happy to work with you on that. I'm looking at the sample expenditures here that you have, and just going down this list, there are very few on here that we would consider to be central office or the LEA costs. Most of these are driven down to the building level. So if they're janitorial for schools, then that's a cost of running that school. So happy to go down. We could do the analysis and then tell you where there are discrepancies, what are the kinds of things that are at the LEA.
Yeah, and then I suspect that the percentage to the LEA will be quite a bit lower in Rhode Island. So that would be fascinating, and we would love to work with you on that. And then, so that's wonderful. Any other questions or comments on this? We did have a little bit of data that show how these numbers are. They do tend to be kind of different across different places, and so they'll definitely be different across states, but they might be different across districts and types of school districts and LEAs in states. So if we look at, oops, let me back this up here, some Afton analysis by Carrie Stewart, who is on. This is just some quick data that they have put together on different ones, and found really vastly different amounts and much larger numbers that were coded to the central. And I wonder, Carrie, if you want to give us some insight into what even the categories that you noticed and so on.
Sure. I think along the lines of what's been discussed, these are two districts within the same state, about 20 miles from one another. And so I think you can see here a couple things that are notable. First, as you mentioned, in both cases, there's a sizable amount of expenses that are not coded to schools. In one case, 42%, and in another case, 61%. And so in order to create a full picture of school spending, obviously an allocation method would be necessary. But then secondly, as noted in the bottom there, you can see there's a real lack of consistency across the two districts, the two LEAs, in terms of what they actually report to school level versus central, making the LEA comparisons more difficult and highlighting the need for that regulation that you cited to have SEAs prescribe rules for recording and allocating expenses. So you can see in one case on the left, some of the central expenses included things like substitute teachers, special ed clinical services, even classroom supplies and materials, athletic expenses, facilities maintenance, CapEx, psychologists. On the right, their central expenses included things like special ed tuition, outplaced tuition, IT, maintenance, insurance, pre-K, support services, again, furniture, textbooks, food services, transportation. So really just, I think this reiterates some of the points that you all have mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and I think for the interesting thing about this is that you can imagine for the district on the left, there's a long way between really parsing its money to the school level when, closing in on 2/3 of the funds are still assigned centrally. And so there's really just a lot of work to do in those districts to kind of get all those dollars out there. And that's not unusual. We find that too in some of our analysis. So Thanks for sharing that. And I think we might see more of that depending on, you know, how some of the states without these more uniform accounting structures that include a location code in them, because it just hasn't been part of their DNA to kind of to sort of think about funds at the we brought this slide too. This is weighted student formula districts, and it's a little bit different of an analysis here, but the green is what is in the formula that goes out to schools. And the gray or the remainder, the difference, 100% minus what's in the green, is what in many places is actually just still left in these central budgets. And you can see that in most of them it's over, you know, 50-60% of the money. So some of that might be like physically at the school, obviously it is, but much of it is at least in these districts, not in their student-based formula. So they often think about money that's in their formula and not. But as you can see, the one that's 100%, and I guess I didn't get all my names on there for some reason, but the one that is 100% is the RSD in New Orleans. So technically in that district, they're putting all their money out to the schools, or at least they were at the time we did this analysis. I think there might be some changes underway, but they put all their money out to the schools, and there isn't really anything that's sitting in the central office. In fact, I think some of the schools pay money back to cover some of those services, and that's often the case of how it is in some charters. So a question would be, how do we create consistency when there are so many different ways of doing accounting at the district level? And another bit of the data, we just visually try to display the Colorado data. So just a heads up that we're back at Colorado. That was done on the different schools there in that the template analysis that we put up. And you can see that with a consistent amount of LEA money in the red and some unevenness in the school level money, and then the charter at the bottom, how comparisons might look. So a couple things this raises, which is, first of all, there will be some that will say, hey, how come the blue isn't the same in all the districts? Why is Gunnison Elementary, the third one down, getting more in school level funds per pupil than Crested Butte, which is at the top? So those are different, you know, and they'll probably be asking some of those questions. And at the same time, you know, one of them might be saying, well, why does the high school get so much? And surely they'll be asking about the charter school. So we'll be seeing some of this stuff. One of the things we should point out is that on the school level report cards, you can report both these numbers, or you could choose just to report the blue. And that does really change the analysis a little bit. So you can do both numbers, like I said, or you can report the blue. And for you all, I wonder if that how that changes your thinking about what will happen when the numbers are out there. Any ideas from the folks in Colorado?
Yeah, so we were thinking that we would want to do both the school level and the district level, just on the first reaction.
Yeah, and I think there'll be places where, you know, if the uniform procedure can't get kind of parse the central perfectly, it at least gives people a little bit more information to deal with the fact that they might have different sized red boxes across different districts. And that's one option. Any other questions or comments on that? We have, this has been great. I want to just sort of finish this little section with two points. That first is that as we embark on developing these uniform procedures, we'll want to know what extent there's consistency or variation in your state's LEAs and charters on the type and level of expenditures accounted for by school or centrally. So if you can go, if you do have a good data set already, you might just look at that question, and that'll give you a sense of how much work there is to do on the uniform procedure. And secondly, you'll want to start thinking, how do we create a uniform procedure that works for different types of districts if you do indeed have a lot of variation in district type? Maybe you have, a whole slew of really small districts that are just one school. Maybe you have some that are decentralized, like, the New Orleans RSDs in your state, or places like that. You might have some charters. You may have some that share services, and maybe even have regional districts that that provide some services. So what kind of a uniform procedure works given your mix of districts? And then will you want to assign cost to central by object type, by function or program, or do you sort of revert to leaving a little looser definition and then make sure that you're still able to sum everything to a school, like we just showed with the last one, even shared costs? So that'll be, I think, kind of the framework for how you'll be able to look at your data and come up with a uniform procedure. Any last questions on that before we turn to our in-person meeting notes, some information on our in-person meeting? I know there are a lot of questions this probably raises, and so feel free if you like to go ahead and post additional thoughts or comments on the Fitwood blog. We can sort of incorporate that and use that to sort of raise issues as we go forward as a working group, also to help help pair up different states that might be working on the same kind of questions or concerns. But if you don't have any more comments or questions here, we'll turn it over to the in-person meeting. Feel free to raise your hand or type more into the question box if you like.
Great, thanks, Marguerite. So we're really excited. Sorry, there's a bit of an echo.
I'll see what I can do on my end.
All right, we're checking it out on our end.
Okay,
I'll try it again. See if it works.
Still there, but maybe we can work through it. So on February 9th, we will host our in-person meeting. Before, we had said that it'll be the 8th through the 10th, but it's just going to be for our group on the 9th from about 8 a.m. till 4:30 p.m. Breakfast will start at 8, and the rest of the programming will start at 8:30. And we're going to be holding these meetings at the CCSSO office, and CCSSO is a partner in this work. And I actually have Maureen on the line as well. So Maureen, do you want to give a little bit of details about kind of who you've already communicated with and who folks can expect to hear from in the coming week with some additional details?
And could I just sorry if I want to jump in, I just wanted to say a little bit more about what will be at the meeting. So we will have kind of a group session in the morning, which would be for CIOs and CFOs and others from SEAs and the LEAs that are participating. And then in the afternoon, we'll hopefully have a lot of breakout groups, including, and I'd love to invite Rhode Island to do a session on their chart of accounts, because I think there'll be a lot of interest in that, but some other ways to sort of look at slices of the equity picture and things like that. Sorry, Maureen, I just wanted to tell people what was involved in the meeting before we talked about the logistics.
No, that's fine, and thank you for that. Absolutely, we're excited to be a partner in this work and excited to host this in-person meeting. So as you see on the screen, it's February 9th. We'll be here at the CCSO offices in Washington, D.C. This is a meeting that is being hosted in conjunction with our existing CIO network meeting. So the CIOs in all of your states have already been invited to the meeting, and you should be receiving, if you are not a CIO, you should be receiving an invitation to register from us either today or tomorrow. and that will come from meetings@ccsso.org. And it'll include information on logistics, where we're located, how to get registered, and where the hotel is, and all of that good stuff. If you have any questions or need support in terms of registration, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Great. Thank you so much, Maureen. I'll pause there and see if anybody has any questions that they want to pose about the event, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask your questions as well. Okay, I am going to launch a poll. I've never done this before, so hopefully it works. So you should see something on your screen now that says a quick poll, and you can just select if you plan to attend. So yes, if you know your CIO is going, or you and another teammate are going to be there, you can select. You can choose it'll just be you. You can say that you aren't going to be able to attend. You can say I'm not sure, or you can say you have no idea what the meeting is and that we need to give you some more details. In which case, if you are selecting that, I hope that you are in touch with me and you can tell me who you are so that I know to get in touch with you and share some more details with you.
And as you're filling that out, I'll just say that we think we have some really great programming at this in-person meeting. There will be time built in to just to connect with each other, but also you'll have an interactive activity where you'll get to work with some data and figure out really kind of the upside of this data, how it might, how people in your schools and districts and communities might use the data in ways that sort of are really exciting. You'll get to hear from some experts, both among yourselves, but also some in the field about what you might be finding about equity, how to think about that. You'll get to hear from some experts on sort of making a plan for communications, is sort of on our agenda for that. There'll be different affiliated groups there that you can connect with if you're having specific questions or problems, and you'll have time with our team as well to sort of think about the challenges ahead in your own state. So we're hoping it's a really productive meeting, and hoping that most of you can at least send someone. Like we said, it's an invitation deal, but so keep us posted. So I know that we have a lot that aren't sure yet, but we're hoping to get a good group.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Marguerite, do you want to show the next steps?
Sure. Something weird went on. Okay, hopefully that's back up on. Okay, so let's see if it's, there we go. Katie, I'll let you go ahead through there.
Yeah, so we'll stay on as usual until 2:30 or until people stop asking questions today. And then we'll have our next call on January 17th, same time. Again, we'll have office hours at the end of that call as well. We'll provide some additional updates for the in-person meeting, either on that call on the 17th, or as Maureen mentioned, you'll be getting a couple of things via email related to that meeting. And then we'd also, again, encourage you to post the results of your school level analysis like you saw Colorado's and Mississippi's today. We'd love for more folks to submit those so we can have some more data to share with the group. I think that really helps us all learn. So if you want to share some of that information, you can do that on the blog, or you can also always email me at katie.hagen@georgetown.edu if you have any questions or anything that you want to share or participate in. You can do it on the blog or via email.
Excellent. Well, I will leave this screen up, but you are welcome to jump off if you like, or stay on if you have questions. Thank you all. I know this is a very busy, short week with a lot going on, so thank you all for joining in, and keep the information flowing.
And if you're saying